That engine had beaten 5 certified technicians across 3 full days. It had brought the lead engineer at Caldwell Motorworks, a man with a graduate degree from Georgia Tech and 19 years of credentials attached to his name, to sign a failure report with a hand that paused twice before the pen touched the page. It had nearly collapsed, a $4.6 million consignment agreement. The kind of deal that takes 3 years of careful cultivation and can disappear in a single phone call on a Friday morning. And then, just before midnight on a Wednesday, a man in a washed-out Navy work shirt walked into the service bay at Caldwell Motorworks. His hand still carried the faint trace of gear oil from the afternoon job he had wrapped up 4 hours earlier. His 7-year-old son was asleep in the truck outside, parked under the yellow security light, a small blue toolbox tucked under one arm. The man walked to the car without greeting anyone. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions. He stood in front of the engine for a long, still moment, the way someone stands before a thing they already understand. And then he said quietly, without any drama at all, "I know what this is. I know exactly what this is." What happens when the one man an entire organization wrote off is the only person in the world who can save it. The shop was called Harlow Auto, and it sat on the eastern edge of Columbus, Ohio, on a block where the buildings ran low and the sidewalks were quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. It occupied the ground floor of a building that had once been a hardware store, and on certain mornings, when the weather turned damp, you could still pick up a faint trace of machine oil that had nothing to do with the cars. The sign out front had been painted by hand, cream letters on dark green, the paint beginning to crack at the corners, where winter had gotten into it. The lift was a second-hand model purchased at auction from a dealership closure in Dayton. But every tool on the pegboard hung in its assigned position, arranged by function and then by size, and the concrete floor was swept clean at the close of every working day without exception. Marcus Harlow ran the shop the way he ran everything, without announcement, without decoration, with a precision that most people who came in for a tire rotation never noticed and never had reason to. Marcus was 38 years old and looked it in the way that comes honestly from working with your hands through every season without much shelter from any of them. He was tall and lean with deep brown skin, close-cropped hair that had begun to show the first faint threads of silver at the temples, and a face that didn't give much away unless you knew how to read stillness. His late mother used to say he had the kind of face that made strangers feel they could ask him for directions, and then trust the answer completely. He didn't talk much to customers beyond what the job asked of him. He didn't explain himself. He didn't volunteer history. When people asked how long he had been doing this, he said a few years, which was technically true if you only counted the years at Harlow Auto and set aside everything that came before. In the bottom drawer of the wooden desk in the far corner, the desk that held the shop's invoice book, a battery radio, and a small calendar from a parts supplier, there was a folded document inside a plain manila envelope. It was a letter of appointment from Rhenish Automotive Sciences, a German precision engineering consultancy that worked with 3 European manufacturers of competition-grade vehicles. The letter named Marcus Harlow as Senior Engine Systems Analyst at the age of 32, the youngest they had ever appointed. The envelope had not been opened in almost 3 years. On the desk, partly behind the invoice book, there was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, a woman with a wide, knowing smile, her hair pulled back loosely. She was holding a much younger version of the boy who now sat on a stool in the corner of the shop every afternoon. And she was looking at the camera like she already knew everything the future intended to do and had made her peace with it. Marcus did not look at it often. He did not need to. That boy on the stool was named Caleb. He was 7 years old and serious, in the particular way that some children become serious early, not because the world has been cruel to them, exactly, but because they have been paying close attention to it since they were very small. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's habit of going quiet when something was working through him. His hair was kept in small, careful twists that Marcus had learned to set himself, the process slower and more patient now than it used to be, as the boy's hair grew in thicker each season. Every afternoon after school, Caleb came to the shop, climbed onto the cushioned stool, and opened his blue plastic toolbox, a battered thing with a white latch he had owned since he was 3. He would lay out the toy ratchet and the toy wrench, and the small, plastic screwdriver on the floor in front of him, and then he would crouch over whatever piece of scrap metal Marcus had set aside for him and work. He took it seriously. He always had. On the shelf above Marcus's desk, beside the radio and the invoice binder, there was a thick notebook with a worn brown cover. It was filled front to back in Marcus's handwriting, notes on pre-emissions European engine architecture, hand-drawn cross-sections of fuel delivery systems, annotated references to long out-of-print engineering texts. On the inside cover, in the same careful script, was a single line. For L below that, smaller, almost invisible, and for whoever comes after. Across the city, on Meridian Avenue where the buildings had glass fronts and valet wore matching slate-gray jackets, Caldwell Motorworks occupied the better part of a city block. The banner stretched above the second-floor windows read, Collector's Exhibition, Private Preview, Saturday 6 p.m. It was the most significant event on Vivian Caldwell's calendar for the year. It had been for the past 7 months. Vivian was 34 and ran Caldwell Motorworks with the kind of targeted intensity that made her genuinely effective and occasionally difficult to be around. She had taken over from her father at 29, restructured the client base in under 2 years, and positioned Caldwell as the premier source for authenticated classic and collector vehicles in the Midwest. She was exact, she was demanding, and she did not give second chances to people who had wasted the first one. She also had not slept a full night in 4 days. Caleb noticed the Caldwell Motorworks banner through the shop window one Tuesday, while Marcus was finishing a caliper replacement on a sedan. The boy pressed his forehead to the glass and studied the photograph of the cars on the banner for a long time. Then he looked back at his father. "Dad," he said, "do you think you could fix those?" Marcus glanced up at the banner. He didn't answer. He turned back to the caliper and kept working. On Monday morning, Marcus drove to Caldwell Motorworks to pick up a parts order. The specific component he needed: a fuel metering valve for a late 70s British roadster he was restoring for a private client. Was only available through an importer that Caldwell Motorworks sourced exclusively, and a direct order would take 8 weeks. He had called ahead. He had a confirmation number. He brought Caleb because school didn't start until 9, and it was supposed to be a quick pickup. He wore what he always wore: work trousers, steel-toed boots, a clean jacket that had seen several winters. Caleb carried his blue toolbox the way other children carry comfort objects, without self-consciousness, without any sense that it required explanation. The Caldwell showroom floor was everything. Harlow Auto was not. High ceilings, recessed lighting arranged to make the cars look like they were lit from within. The staff moved in quiet clusters and spoke at the considered volume of people who understand that loudness is a form of waste. Marcus went to the parts counter, gave his confirmation number and waited. Caleb stood beside him and looked up at a silver 1959 Aston Martin on the nearest platform with the pure, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned that some things are not for people like them. That was when Brandon Cole came through the door behind the counter. Brandon was the head of technical operations at Caldwell Motorworks. He was 43, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had been told he was the smartest person in every room he'd ever stood in, and who had stopped questioning whether that was true. He took one look at Marcus, top to bottom, unhurried, and then he looked at Caleb and the blue plastic toolbox. He spoke at a volume designed to be heard by the 2 staff members nearby and the couple browsing the far end of the floor. Parts counter isn't a walk-in service desk for backyard shops. If you need wholesale components, there's a trade warehouse out on Morse Road. He paused for exactly the right amount of time. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't bring your kid in here and treat the showroom floor like a daycare. This isn't that kind of place." The room went quiet in the specific way spaces go quiet when something has occurred that everyone present has privately decided to ignore. One of the browsing customers turned slightly toward the window. A staff member near the back found something urgent on her clipboard. Caleb stopped looking at the Aston Martin. He looked down at the blue toolbox in his hands instead, and then he pressed it against his chest with both arms. Here it is worth slowing down for a moment, the way you slow before a curve you can see coming but can't avoid. What happened at that counter was not, on its surface, unusual. A man in an expensive suit said something sharp to a man in work clothes. It happens in showrooms and lobbies and restaurants every day in this country, and most of the people watching look at their phones or their menus because looking away is the easier calculation. But some forms of contempt carry a longer history than the room they occur in, and the men who receive them have, by a certain age, developed a very particular set of responses. None of those responses involve raising a voice, because raising a voice in a room like that, for men who look like Marcus Harlow, produces consequences that bear no relationship to the size of the offense. So the stillness is not weakness. The stillness is a calculation made in the fraction of a second by a man who has been running that calculation his entire adult life. And the dignity is real, and it is hard-won, and it costs something that the man in the expensive suit will never once be asked to pay. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. He looked at Brandon Cole for approximately 2 seconds, a look that was completely flat and somehow more difficult to absorb than anger would have been, and then he looked at Caleb. He said nothing to Brandon. He simply waited at the counter. The parts clerk, a younger man who had been watching the whole exchange with his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him, processed the confirmation number and brought the component from the back. Marcus signed for it, tucked the box under his arm, and walked to the exit. Caleb fell in beside him. Just before they reached the door, Caleb said quietly, "Dad, let's go." And they did. On the second floor, behind the long window that looked out over the showroom floor, Vivian Caldwell had watched the exchange. She had seen Brandon's performance. She had seen the man in the work jacket. She had seen the small boy with the blue toolbox held tight against his chest. She had not intervened. She had looked back at her phone. She had walked away from the window. She told herself she hadn't heard it clearly enough to be sure. She would think about that later, in the quiet of the service bay on Wednesday night, and she would know that wasn't the truth. On Monday evening, Marcus drove home, collected Caleb from the neighbor who had kept him after school, and made dinner. Pasta, a green salad, water for himself, apple juice for the boy. They ate at the kitchen table, with the window cracked to the backyard. Caleb was quieter than usual. He ate in careful, measured forkfuls and didn't ask for seconds. Afterward, they sat on the back step, while the last of the daylight worked its way down through the maple at the yard's edge. Caleb turned his toy screwdriver over and over in his hands. He had the same expression his mother used to get when something was taking its time working through him. A stillness in the eyes, a slight downward pull at the corners of his mouth. Finally he asked, "Dad, why did that man talk to you like that?" Marcus looked out at the yard. He let the question sit for a moment. "He didn't know who he was talking to," Marcus said. "Does that make it okay?" "No," Marcus said. "It doesn't." Caleb turned the screwdriver over again. "Why didn't you say anything back?" Marcus reached over and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Briefly. The way he touched things he cared about, without making a production of it. "Some things don't need to be said," he told him. "They only need to be done." Caleb looked at him. He was 7, and 7 years of living has its limits when it comes to statements like that. But he nodded, because he trusted his father the way children trust the people who have never once given them a reason not to. Inside, after Caleb was asleep, Marcus stood at the kitchen shelf and looked at the brown notebook. He had not opened it in several months. Among other things, it held 52 pages of research on the engineering philosophy of a man named Costantino Ferretti, an Italian engine architect who had worked for a small Milanese restoration firm in the 1980s and 90s, producing undocumented modifications to pre-emissions European engines that no one had ever formally catalogued. Ferretti had died in 2006 without leaving written records of his methods. What he had left behind were engines. Engines that people who understood them said ran differently from any other engines they had ever heard. Marcus had spent 3 years studying Ferretti's work. Not as professional research, exactly. More as an obsession that had grown from something he couldn't stop turning over in his mind. That Ferretti had understood engines not as mechanical systems, but as acoustic ones. Each component tuned to a specific frequency so that the assembled whole operated as a single coherent resonant body rather than a collection of separate parts. The research was the most complete existing analysis of Ferretti's methodology that anyone had produced. He knew this because he had checked. And then Lena had died on a Tuesday afternoon, on a stretch of I-71 she drove every single day. And Marcus had closed the notebook, put it on the shelf, loaded Caleb and as much of their lives as would fit into the truck, and driven back to Columbus, to this house, to this shop. Not because he was afraid to look back, but because there was a boy who needed a father who was present, and Marcus Harlow, above everything else, understood how to be present. Tuesday came and went at Caldwell Motorworks without progress. Vivian brought in a specialist restoration team from Detroit, a group with a strong reputation for pre-war and early post-war European vehicles. They worked through the full day. That evening, their team leader sat across from Vivian in the conference room and was honest in the plain, direct way that only people who are genuinely stumped can afford to be. Whatever Ferretti did to that engine, he said, he did it according to a logic I've never seen documented anywhere. The modifications are visible. We can see them. But we don't understand the system they create. We're afraid to go further without understanding it, because the wrong move could cause damage that cannot be reversed. He paused. I think the person who can fix this engine is someone who has spent serious, dedicated time specifically studying how Ferretti worked. Not just classic European engines. Ferretti himself. The car in question was a 1969 Lamborghini Islero S, one of 225 ever built. This particular example had been modified in the early 1990s by Costantino Ferretti, working privately on behalf of a collector who had since died. Ferretti had left no drawings, no service notes, no annotated schematics of any kind. What he had left was a V8 engine that had run, by every account, better than the day it left the Sant'Agata factory, until 5 days ago, when it had simply stopped. Not gradually, not with warning. Between one firing cycle and the next, it had stopped as completely as if the power source had been removed from the universe. The car's owner, a man named Harrison Greer, who held a collection of 11 vehicles on consignment at Caldwell Motorworks, had called Vivian on Sunday afternoon. His voice had been steady. That was worse than if he had shouted. If the Islero was not running and on display by Saturday at 6 p.m., he told her he would withdraw the consignment agreement in its entirety and seek a different representative. That was $4.6 million in inventory. The exhibition, Caldwell Motorworks' most significant event in 4 years, reduced to an empty platform and a conversation Vivian did not want to have with anyone in that room. 5 of Caldwell's certified technicians had worked on the Islero in sequence and then in combination across 5 days. Not one of them found the fault. The diagnostic equipment returned contradictory error codes that gestured at 3 different problems simultaneously and confirmed none of them. Brandon Cole, who had spent the better part of the 5th day personally under the hood, wrote in his technical assessment, "Engine systems unrecoverable by current means. Recommend client notification of irreversible mechanical failure." Vivian read the report, set it face down on her desk, and made 3 calls. The first specialist declined immediately when he heard the car's year and the name Ferretti. The second quoted a timeline of 10 weeks and an opening fee of $600,000. The third drove in from Cincinnati, walked around the Islero for 20 minutes, and then walked back out to his car without a word. He called from the road. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know what Ferretti did in there. And because I don't know, I can't go further without risking making it impossible to fix it all." Vivian stood alone in the service bay after the call ended. The Islero sat under the work lights in a deep forest green that was the color of something old and completely sure of itself. She put her hand on the hood for a moment. Then she took it away. On Wednesday morning, Brandon Cole suggested using a substitute vehicle, a different Islero, a 1968 model that was close enough in appearance that most guests at the exhibition would not notice the difference. Vivian rejected this in under 8 seconds. "That's not Harrison's car," she said. "It's not what we agreed to display. We don't do that." Brandon gave her a long look. She returned it without moving, and he left the room. Vivian was not a sentimental person, and she was not particularly devoted to principle as an abstract concept. But there were lines in business that she did not cross. She had watched her father cross them, and she had watched what they cost him over time. Her version of Caldwell Motorworks was not going to be built that way. On Thursday morning, Vivian's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, set a single page on Vivian's desk and stepped back without saying anything. The page had 2 items on it. The first was a name, Marcus Harlow, Harlow Auto, followed by an address on the east side. Below the name, Patricia had written in her small, precise hand what a contact in the restoration industry had told her. Marcus Harlow, Former senior engine systems analyst, Renish Automotive Sciences. Left 3 years ago. Has not returned to the field. Wrote the only comprehensive existing analysis of Ferretti's engineering methodology, an unpublished research document cited in 2 peer-reviewed engineering papers. Currently operates a one-man repair shop. Single father. Vivian read the page twice. She looked at Patricia. This is the man from Monday. It was not a question. Patricia said nothing. She didn't need to. Vivian looked out the window for a long moment. Then she said, "Find him a time tonight. I'll go myself." Marcus was finishing the last job of the evening, a coolant system flush on a pickup truck, when he heard footsteps in the bay that had no business being there. He rolled out from under the truck and stood up. Vivian Caldwell was standing in the doorway, jacket on, dark hair pulled back, a portfolio under one arm. Patricia stood one step behind her. Marcus recognized Vivian immediately. She was the woman on the second floor, the one who had looked down at the showroom floor and then turned away. She recognized him too. He could see it in the slight adjustment she made when their eyes met. Not quite an apology yet, but the posture of someone who knows they are carrying a debt they don't entirely know how to pay. Vivian did not use preamble. I have a 1969 Lamborghini Islero S with a modified V8 engine. Non-standard modifications, no documentation. 5 technicians, 2 outside teams, 5 days, and nobody can fix it. The exhibition is Saturday at 6. I need you. Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at her. He did not rush to fill the silence. After a moment, Vivian said more quietly, "I know you came to our facility on Monday. I know what happened. I was there and I didn't stop it. That was wrong." She didn't elaborate. She wasn't someone who expanded on apologies. But she had said it plainly, and she had meant it, and Marcus heard both things, the words and the fact of them. "What did your technicians do to it?" he asked. She described the 5 days in detail, every attempt, every instrument used, every proposed solution that had gone nowhere. Marcus listened without interruption. When she finished, he asked one question. "Who worked on the engine last?" "A man named Ferretti," Vivian said. "Costantino Ferretti. He died in 2006. For the first time since she had walked through the door, something shifted in Marcus's face. Not a dramatic thing. A small thing. The stillness changed quality, the way still water changes when something moves beneath the surface. "You know him?" Vivian said. It was not quite a question. "I know his work," Marcus said. "That's a different thing." He glanced across the bay to where Caleb was curled on the wooden stool under a blanket, asleep, the blue toolbox held loosely in one small hand. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then he looked back at Vivian. "I'll come look at it," he said. "I'm not making you any promises." He locked up the shop, drove Caleb 3 streets over to the home of Dottie Pearson, 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had known Marcus since he was in grade school, who had brought him a casserole and sat with him for 3 hours the week after Lena died, asking nothing, offering only presents. She opened the door, took one look at the bag of tools Marcus was carrying, and nodded. No questions. He drove to Caldwell Motorworks. There is perhaps a quieter truth living in this particular moment, one worth naming, simply. The most generous thing a person can sometimes do after they have wronged someone is not to fill the air with words about it, but to give them the space to be exactly who they are, on their own terms. Vivian didn't know that was what she was doing. She thought she was hiring a mechanic. But people often do their best work without understanding what it is. The service bay was empty except for the 3 of them and the car. The Islero sat under the overhead lights in its deep forest green, and even standing completely still in a fluorescent workshop, it had a quality that was difficult to name. Something in the proportion of it, the low, coiled stance, the way the light moved across the long hood as if it knew it was being observed. Marcus stood in front of it for a long moment without touching it. Then he walked around it once, slowly, his hands at his sides, then again. Vivian watched from a stool she had pulled to the far end of the bay. She had folded her jacket across her lap and was sitting with the specific graciousness of someone exercising real restraint. Patricia stood near the door. Brandon Cole had been in the building when Marcus arrived. He had seen who Vivian had called in. His expression when he turned and left without a word carried the particular quality of a contempt that is beginning, reluctantly, against its will, to shade into something it doesn't have a name for yet. Marcus opened the hood. He looked at the engine without touching it. Just looked. The way he looked at everything before he touched it. a habit formed when he was young and never abandoned. Then he reached into his bag and removed a stethoscope, modified for this kind of work, the chest piece replaced with a small metal probe. The tubing extended, the ear cups repadded. He began placing the probe against the engine block in a systematic pattern that made no immediate sense from outside, but was in fact a sequence he had developed from diagrams in the brown notebook, now open on the workbench beside him. He listened. The bay was quiet enough that the only sounds were the faint tick of cooling metal and the occasional noise from the street outside. Vivian held her position for 23 minutes. Then she stood and walked halfway toward the car. "Have you found something?" Marcus said without looking up. "Not yet. But I know what I'm looking for." She asked what that was. He straightened slightly and told her. Ferretti didn't engineer conventionally. He engineered acoustically. Every component calibrated to resonate at a specific frequency, so the system as a whole operates as a single harmonic unit. If one component is moved, even fractionally, out of its designed position, the resonance breaks and the entire system shuts down. Not slowly, immediately. There's no error code for it, because no diagnostic software was ever written to look for it. You'd have to know it was possible before you could know to search for it. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn that?" "I spent 3 years studying Ferretti's work. I was going to write a formal thesis on it." "What happened?" She asked it quietly, the way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer belongs to a space you don't have the right to enter. Marcus said, "My wife died. After that, I wasn't interested in writing anymore." He said it the way he said everything, without softness, without hardness. Just the plain weight of a fact that has been carried long enough that it no longer needs assistance. Vivian looked at the Islero's engine and said nothing. It was 11 minutes past 1 in the morning when he found it. He had removed the third and fourth layers of the fuel delivery assembly, working with the patience of someone who knows that urgency and speed are not the same thing, and has stopped confusing them. And there, seated between the primary and secondary fuel rails, was a wafer-thin thermal regulation plate that had no business being there according to any factory documentation. Ferretti had fabricated it himself from a titanium-nickel alloy, approximately 1.8 millimeters thick, positioned with tolerances measured in tenths of a millimeter. One of the previous technicians, almost certainly while probing the fuel delivery system for a fault they didn't understand, had displaced the plate by 0.4 millimeters, a distance the width of 4 human hairs, enough to break the resonance, enough to kill the engine as completely as cutting its power at the source. Marcus straightened and looked at the plate in the light. "The problem is here. This plate needs to be refabricated and repositioned. The original has microfractures. It was probably compromised when it was moved. It won't hold in its current state." Vivian said, "It's past 1 in the morning, I know. I need 35 grams of titanium nickel alloy and a handheld grinder with a fine-grade wheel." She looked at for 1 second, then she picked up her phone. It took her 50 minutes, 4 phone calls, and a premium charge from a 24-hour fabrication shop on the west side of the city. She got it. Marcus worked for 2 more hours. He fabricated the replacement plate on the workbench using the grinder, the original as his template, and calipers that measured in hundredths of a millimeter. He checked the thickness at 13 points. Then he checked it again. Then he reseated the assembly layer by layer. Each component returned to its exact position in the order he had documented before disassembly. His hands did not rush. They never did. They moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who has performed 10,000 versions of this motion and no longer needs to think through any of them. Vivian watched without speaking. At some point, Patricia had quietly brought 2 coffees from a machine upstairs and left one near Marcus and one near Vivian and retreated without a word. At 3:38 in the morning, Marcus closed the engine cover, set down his tools, and looked at the Islero. "Start it," he said. Vivian climbed into the driver's seat. She put the key in. She turned it. The V8 engine turned over, caught, and opened into a sound that filled the service bay completely. Not the uncertain sound of a sick engine reaching, but a deep, even, authoritative sound that settled immediately into a low, resonant idle. The sound of something that knew exactly what it was. Vivian sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and did not move for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes. When she opened them, Marcus was wiping down his tools and placing them one by one back in the bag. He was at the door with his bag over his shoulder before Vivian got out of the car. "I'll send an invoice by email," he said. "Standard rate, parts cost is additional." "I want to know what to pay you," she said. "You'll get what I send." He looked at Caleb, asleep on the stool. Dottie had driven him over after midnight and settled him there without being asked, the way she did things, without theater, without waiting to be thanked. Marcus picked the boy up, settled him against his shoulder, picked up the blue toolbox in the same hand. Caleb stirred but didn't wake. Marcus walked to his truck in the pre-dawn dark. He buckled Caleb into the back, got in, and drove home. He got there at 6:07. He drank a coffee at the kitchen table in the quiet house, while the street outside slowly filled with the sound of a neighborhood beginning its day. He was still sitting there when Caleb came downstairs at 6:52, blinking, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Dad, where did we go?" "I fixed a car," Marcus said. "A good one?" Caleb said. Not quite a question, more a statement of what he expected from his father's nights. "Yes," Marcus said. "I think you'd like it. There is something worth noticing, gently, before we move forward." A person can spend years preparing for a moment they have no way of anticipating. They can study, build, refine, put all of it on a shelf, and walk away believing the preparation has exhausted its purpose. And then, on a Wednesday night they couldn't have planned for, the preparation will be exactly what someone else needs, and will have been waiting, quietly, and without complaint, for exactly this. Nothing studied with care is ever truly wasted. It only waits. Patricia put a tablet in front of Vivian at 7:45 that morning before Vivian had finished her first coffee. On the screen was an article from a European automotive engineering publication dated 2020. The headline read, "Rhenish Automotive Sciences names Marcus Harlow Senior Engine Systems Analyst, youngest appointment in firm history." The photograph showed Marcus in a suit, standing beside an engine prototype, facing a row of cameras, with the expression of a man who would considerably rather be looking at the engine than being photographed next to it. Below the article, Patricia had pulled a footnote from an academic paper on pre-emissions European powertrains, published in 2021, which cited an unpublished research document by Marcus Harlow of Rhenish Automotive Sciences as the most thorough existing analysis of Ferretti's engineering methodology produced by any researcher to date. Patricia said quietly, "He didn't just know about Ferretti. He is the foremost living authority on Ferretti's work." Vivian set down her coffee. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The younger face. The same flat, steady eyes. The hands that even in a posed photograph looked like they were resting, not performing. She thought about the man at the parts counter on Monday morning, the boy with the blue plastic toolbox. The way Marcus had looked at Brandon Cole for 2 seconds and said absolutely nothing, and walked out the door. She thought about everything that look had contained, and everything he had not bothered to say because he hadn't needed to. She picked up her coffee again. "Where is Brandon?" she asked. Patricia told her. "Send him in," Vivian said. The conversation that followed lasted 11 minutes. Vivian did not raise her voice. She did not use harsh language. She told Brandon, in the same tone she used to discuss quarterly performance projections, that effective the following Monday, he would be reassigned to a senior technician role, 2 levels below his current position, with a corresponding adjustment to his compensation. There was no disciplinary letter, no formal review. She did not explain the decision in terms of Monday's incident at the parts counter. She didn't need to. Brandon stood across the desk with his jaw set. He did not argue, because there was nothing to argue. He knew what he had done. He knew what it had cost, what he had not accounted for, what he had never once considered when he looked at the man in the work jacket and the boy with the blue toolbox, was that the man he had humiliated in his own showroom was the only person in the professional world capable of solving the problem Brandon himself had declared unsolvable. He had called it irreversible. He had put that in writing, and then the man he dismissed had walked in and fixed it before breakfast. Brandon looked at Vivian. Something moved through his expression that was not quite contrition and not quite understanding. Something earlier than both of those, something more uncomfortable. The specific sensation of a person realizing that the frame they have been using to read the world has been wrong in a way that is going to take a long time to recalibrate. He left the office without a word. The exhibition that Saturday evening was everything it was meant to be. Caldwell Motorworks' main floor was transformed into something between a gallery and a concert hall. Warm directional lighting, careful spacing between vehicles, a small chamber group in the corner playing something European and unhurried. The guests came in their good clothes and moved slowly between the cars, with the reverence that beautiful, expensive things tend to produce in people who can afford to be in the same room with them. At the center of the display, on the raised platform in the middle of the floor, the 1969 Lamborghini Islero S sat in its deep forest green, under a light angled specifically to follow the curve of the hood. Its engine was running. The sound it produced was barely audible in the room, a low, settled vibration that you registered in your chest before your ears found it. But it was there, and it was perfect. And every person in the room who knew anything about these cars understood what it meant that it was there. Harrison Greer arrived at 6:22, 22 minutes past the hour, the way men of his particular standing arrive at things. Unhurried, certain the room will accommodate. He was 69, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who had spent most of his life surrounded by things of exceptional quality and had developed the ability to recognize them without visible effort. He walked directly to the Islero. He put his hand on the hood above the engine and held it there, feeling the vibration. He stood like that for a moment with an expression that was not for anyone else in the room. Then he found Vivian. "You got it done," he said. Not praise, not accusation. A statement from a man who had not entirely believed it was possible. "I had help," Vivian said. Harrison looked at her carefully. He had worked with Vivian for 3 years, and he had never heard her use that particular word in connection with herself. "Who?" "Marcus Harlow," Vivian said. Harrison Greer was quiet for a count of 4. Then slowly, "The Harlow who wrote the Ferretti analysis?" "Yes, my God." He looked at the Islero, then back at her. "I read 40 pages of that analysis in draft form 6 years ago. A colleague at Renish sent it to me. I thought whoever wrote it must have spent the better part of a decade on it." He paused. "What is he doing now?" "He has a small shop," Vivian said. "East side of the city. General repair work." Harrison looked at her with an expression that was not pity, not admiration, but something positioned between those two things and aimed at life itself and its strange, persistent arrangements. "Some men choose the life they choose," he said. "That deserves to be respected." He moved away to rejoin the other guests. Vivian watched him go, and then she looked at the Islero, and then she looked at the space above the street, through the tall windows, and she stayed there longer than the evening required. Marcus's invoice arrived on Saturday morning, as he had said it would. The number was reasonable in the way that the invoices of people who are very good at something and have stopped needing to charge what they're worth tend to be reasonable. Vivian looked at it for a moment. Then she did the arithmetic. Then she opened her banking application and transferred 2.5 times the invoiced amount to the account listed. She did not include a note. She assumed he would understand. He did. He saw the notification while he was halfway through pulling the alternator on a sedan that had come in that morning. He looked at the number on his screen, and what he felt was not surprise. He had assessed Vivian Caldwell correctly in the first 20 minutes, and this was consistent with that assessment. And then he put the phone in his pocket and went back to the alternator. 4 days later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the shop by regular mail. Inside was a business card, heavy stock, plain, the name Harrison Greer in small capital letters, a phone number. Nothing else. On the back, in handwriting, "When you're ready to talk, not about cars but about what you still want to do, call me." Marcus held the card for a moment. Then he set it on the shelf beside the brown leather notebook. On Sunday afternoon, he took Caleb to the park 2 blocks from the house. It was the kind of afternoon that exists specifically to make cities feel like something other than what they are. Temperature precisely right, light through the trees at a long golden angle, the benches occupied by people who had nowhere more important to be and knew it. Marcus sat on the bench nearest the oaks with a thermos of coffee. Caleb ran in wide circles with his blue toolbox, performing some elaborate private operation that involved inspecting the root systems of trees for structural weaknesses. He was still there when he heard footsteps on the path and looked up. Vivian Caldwell was walking toward the bench from the direction of the main gate. She was wearing something that wasn't work clothes, which made her look like a slightly different person. Same economy of movement, same posture, but without the professional architecture around her. She had recognized him before he recognized her. She stopped about 6 feet away, and they looked at each other. Neither of them spoke for a moment, which under different circumstances might have been awkward, and under these circumstances simply was what it was. Caleb came pelting back from the tree line, skidded to a stop, looked at Vivian, and looked at his father. "Do you know her?" "Yes," Marcus said. Caleb looked at Vivian. "Does he know you because of cars?" Something shifted at the corner of Vivian's mouth. "He helped me fix one." Caleb considered this with the efficiency of a child who takes information seriously. "Was it a good one?" "Very good," she said. Caleb accepted this as a complete account of the matter and ran back to the trees. Marcus moved along the bench slightly, not an invitation, not its opposite. Just space. Vivian sat down. They were quiet for a moment, watching Caleb conduct his structural assessment at the base of a large oak. Vivian said, "You received the transfer. Yes, you didn't object to the amount." "I don't do charity," Marcus said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "you don't." She looked forward again. The park made comfortable sounds around them. Children, birds, the middle-distance noise of the city conducting its Sunday business. "Are you going to call Harrison?" Vivian asked. Marcus turned the thermos in his hands. "I don't know. Caleb's still young." "That's not really an answer. It's the true one." He said it without deflection, without apology. She looked at him for a moment, and then looked back at the field where Caleb was now sitting cross-legged on the grass with his toolbox open, arranging the contents in a careful row with the focus of someone conducting an inventory. Vivian said, "What you did Wednesday night. Not just the technical part, the whole thing. Most people in your position would have let Caldwell Motorworks fail. Most people in my position weren't there," Marcus said. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time since she had sat down. He looked back. "If there's ever a day when you want to do something more than fix ordinary cars," she said, "I would like to be the first person you call." Marcus held her gaze. "Why?" She paused, not because she didn't have the answer, but because she was deciding how much of it was appropriate to give. "Because I know what I did on Monday," she said, "and I don't like carrying debts I haven't settled." She stood, tucked her hands into her jacket pockets, and walked back the way she had come. Unhurried, not looking back. Her footsteps steady on the path until the trees came between her and the bench. Marcus watched until she was gone. Then he looked at Caleb, who had finished his inventory and was now holding up the toy wrench and examining it against the light with the expression of a craftsman evaluating a tool. Caleb said, without looking up, "Did she leave already?" "Yes, she seemed okay." Marcus looked at the path where Vivian had walked. The light through the oaks made a shifting, settling pattern on the ground. "She might be," he said. Caleb accepted this, returned the wrench to the toolbox, and snapped the white latch closed. He carried the box over and set it on the bench beside Marcus, then climbed up and leaned against his father's arm. Marcus put his arm around the boy. They sat there while the afternoon did its slow, unhurried work around them, and the blue toolbox sat between the man and the space he had made on the bench, worn at the corners, the latch scratched from 4 years of use, small and present, and completely at ease with itself. On the shelf back at the shop, the cream-colored business card rested against the spine of the brown notebook. Marcus had not looked at it since he set it down. He did not need to look at it to know it was there. That was enough, for now. Some lives are measured by the rooms they are invited into and the titles attached to names, and the certificates kept in desk drawers. Other lives are measured by the weight of a 7-year-old boy leaning against his father's arm on a quiet Sunday afternoon while the light comes through the trees at exactly the right angle. Both kinds of measurement are real. Both ask something of the people who choose them. But only one of them will be returned to you exactly when you need it most. The boy will remember a father who could fix things no one else could fix. He will also remember a father who never raised his voice when he had every right to, who never explained himself when explanation wasn't required, who came home every evening and was there every morning, who showed him, without ever once naming what he was showing him, that the measure of a person has nothing to do with whether the room recognizes it. That is an inheritance no certificate can equal. And it is given quietly, day after ordinary day, by people whose names the world does not know and may never learn, and who do not need it to. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones who hold everything together. Sometimes the life everyone told you to dismiss is the only one that was ever real. Sometimes the person everyone underestimated turns out to be the one person who was never for a single moment confused about who they were. Dignity isn't given, it's recognized. And the people who refuse to see it in others are the ones who lose it themselves. Slowly, quietly, in the privacy of their own reckoning. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to discover who they really were? Share your story below. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hidden depths, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.